Hello and welcome to the Madras Medai podcast. Madras Medai is a festival and business expo which celebrates the equality in music and enables artists from different backgrounds to come together with a collective conscience. The podcast will cover various aspects pertaining to building an inclusive, diverse, and equal music ecosystem. This series is powered by the British Council.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Madras Medai podcast. This is a fine evening in Chennai where we are all set to have this very special conversation with our very special speakers today. My name is OfRo, and I'm the co founder of Madras Medai. I'm also a music producer and a culture vulture. And today we are diving headfirst into a conversation about remote artistic collaborations with our industry experts. We have with us today Nainita Desai, an award winning music composer credited with acclaimed productions like Netflix's Bad Boy Billionaires, Sundance winning feature film The Reason I Jump, and BAFTA and Cannes winning feature doc For Sama. Nainita joins us in conversation from her studio in London. Hi, Nainita.
Hi, OfRo. It's a pleasure to be here today.
We also have with us our very own prolific music composer, Santhosh Narayanan, who is no stranger to most of you listening. His recent indie production with fellow artist and daughter Dee has been widely received internationally, taking Tamil music further to the world stage. Our two esteemed speakers have joined us on this episode to discuss how artists and music producers around the world are coping during a time of isolation and social distancing. At this juncture, Madras Medai would like to thank our cultural partner, British Council, for their continued support in the arts space and for making this conversation between our Indian and UK speakers come to life. In this podcast series, we hope to better understand and navigate the independent music space and cultural landscapes of the digital sphere. So, first of all, I'd like to say hello, Santosh sir. It's a pleasure to have both of you on this conversation with us, and I'm sure even our listeners would really enjoy tuning into this particular episode.
Hello, Afro. Thank you, and thanks, Nainita, for joining us. It makes this call very special.
It's great to meet you, Santhosh.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, it is truly my pleasure to be hosting this conversation with the both of you. Would you please tell our listeners a little bit about yourselves and your involvement in the music scene? Nainita, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I live in London and born and brought up in London, and I'm a film and television composer here. I started off as a sound designer on feature films and worked as an assistant, as a music engineer, freelancing for people like Peter Gabriel and other sort of world music artists at Real World Studios in Bath. And then about 20 years ago, I moved into composing for film and television and video games as well. So I've worked on hundreds of productions. Most of my clients are Netflix, the BBC. I'm working on a series for Marvel at the moment, a live action drama series, and working on various productions. So my studio is based in London. From most composers here, screen composers, have their home studio setups. So I'm very fortunate in that I have a house, and at the back of my garden, I have a shed, which is my recording studio, from which I create all my music. But I do have expanded teams depending on the project and the budget. I record at studios outside and work with orchestras, and I bring soloists to my home, and pretty much like most media composers.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that with us, Nainita. I'm very excited to be getting more in depth into your production and your workflow in this conversation. How about you, Santosh? Sir? How would you describe what you do to our listeners?
So, hi. Yes.
Our listeners already know what you do, but
No,
how would you? What is it to you?
I wouldn't say that. I would rather introduce myself to everyone. Hi, my name is Santhosh Narayanan, and I am I can call myself an Indian music composer. I primarily work here on the movie industry, as you may call it in India. I was an independent musician for around 8 years, and I had a great interest in film music compositions, and I started my work in 2012 in a Tamil movie called Attakathi. And later on, I just had to. There's a lot of work happening in movies, and I had to stick to movies for a while. And incidentally, as we speak, I think before our last call and this, I had launched my first independent song with my daughter, and it was all good. And I'm also very happy that Nainita has been working on some great projects in the UK, and I can see a lot of similarity in the workflows of musicians, especially during the COVID times. And very recently, I had the opportunity to compose alongside Mr. Richard Harvey, who's also a British composer, and I'm also working with Chris Cracker, who's a close aide of the great Hans Zimmer, and we have been doing a lot of work in and around the UK. So a lot of British musicians are also taking part in the art side of India. Right now, it is in the cinema space, but soon it will be venturing into the independent space too.
Thank you for sharing that with us, sir. Between names like Peter Gabriel and Richard Harvey, and both of you having been independent artists in the past, I guess this is the perfect moment to dive straight into our main subject matter this evening, which is remote recording collaborations. So, starting with how has this last year been for you, Nainita? With your heavy workload and UK's strict lockdown regulations, how have you coped with the production goals that you have to meet?
It's a very funny situation because there's a running joke amongst all us composers in that we live in lockdown anyway. Because my life
Absolutely.
my life is in lockdown because I'm locked in my studio here anyway, working in isolation. So it's there hasn't been too much change for me personally, but of course it has affected my life and my work. Mentally, it's no fun when you know that I can't go out and meet people and collaborate. And I was doing a lot of traveling. In fact, I was in Mumbai last February, working for a few days, and I was meeting with Netflix, and I had meetings and so on. And I came back to London, and we were in lockdown. So, in terms of work, quite a few of my productions were delayed because of filming and not being able to film. So some projects which were already in edit in post production were fine because they instantly moved towards working remotely, where the editor would have their edit computer system in their home, the directors were working in their home, and I was working from my studio here. So that was business as usual because I could carry on writing music and send mixes, and I work for clients all over the world anyway, from New York, Los Angeles, even in the UK. I never see my clients. Once I have one meeting with them, we then instantly go to working remotely. And at the moment, I'm working on a production where the editor is in San Francisco, the director is in Hong Kong, and the producer is in Australia. The problem with that is we have a very small window where we can meet up on Zoom when we're all awake. But I had, in fact, 2 days after lockdown happened in the UK last March, I got a call from Netflix saying, offering me a project, which is American Murder, The Family Next Door, which was, I think, number one worldwide, the most watched documentary on Netflix last year. And the first thing they said to me was, we want a live orchestral score. And of course, the day before, Abbey Road, Air Studios, they'd all shut down. All the musicians had stopped work literally overnight. All my friends, musician friends, started emailing me saying, we haven't got any work. Everything stopped. And what are we going to do? So that was difficult, working with live musicians. And I got around it we had a whole system worked out. By the time it came for me to record in May last year, May, June, for Netflix, instead of having all the musicians in one room together, like at Abbey Road, which is where I would have recorded, we did everything remotely using technology, and that was a very, very interesting experience. I mean, I do work with musicians remotely, with musicians abroad, which I enjoy, but this was on a bigger scale.
Thank you for sharing with us, Nainita. It is indeed reassuring that like some of these really big productions that happen. In fact, they're intercontinental productions, and even American Murder on Netflix, which I did watch. Um, it's reassuring to know that even during a time like this, that it is possible for creators to find a way and move forward and not let this be a speed bump along the way. On that note, Santosh sir, could you tell our listeners how you have coped with the logistics of your recent productions during this last year? Because I work with you closely, I'm aware that in the last year you've made some radical changes to your workflow. You've updated your studio and you've gone above and beyond to expand your productions. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Thank you, Nanita. It was so beautiful to hear about your productions, and thank you, Afro, for the question. Yes, mostly my work has been solo inside the studio. I tend to keep the number of people in my studio as little as possible to keep myself at my best of minds. And as you know, it is very easy in my part of the world to have a lot of people around us, and that is also good. But I prefer to work alone. So like Nainita said, we have been in lockdown for the past decade or so. Uh, especially during the lockdown, I found out that I had worked with Abbey Road Studios and did a lot of mixing there with Studios 301 in Australia, and almost every service was closed. Only I think only the mastering services were open, and the engineers were working remotely from their own places. So I thought that I should be best equipped to handle any kind of sound that we record, and especially with the rural parts of India where there is very restricted access to studios and recording gear. I thought that whatever I get should be released in the best sound possible, at least to my satisfaction. So I had to buy a lot of gear, probably set things up in a better way, and probably have at least have some of the best converters and speakers and models and so on. So that was one part of it, and all this was preparation towards capturing talent which had no access to the outside world, and especially the rural parts of India was actually there was no lockdown as such in the rural parts of India, but they couldn't move between districts. So I had to find places where we can record, probably send. There's very limited access at certain dates, so that was the time we had to send all the. We had to buy more gear for each district, equip each district, and select musicians. We had to make sure that nobody was falling sick or having COVID or whatever. So it was a very, very unique process. But in fact, I did more work and more recordings than I would normally do. So this restriction actually brought out a lot of musicians for me personally, and I could collaborate with a lot of great, amazing talent. And sometimes I would feel that I wouldn't have recorded them at this quality even if they were at my own studio. There were a lot of magical captures that happened. So in a way, it is good. It helped a lot of musicians and so on. So yeah, so it was like a reset for me. It was a complete reset for me totally.
It was really interesting you saying that, Santhosh, because about 2 weeks after lockdown here, when I was getting phone calls and emails from all my musician colleagues being out of work, and of course all my composer friends and colleagues having lost work as well. They were suffering. And so what I did, and because of I was doing this Netflix production, I thought what I needed was a database, a list of names of musicians that could record remotely. And so I thought I'd put together my own little database. And I put a call out on social media, on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And I for my own sort of Google spreadsheet. And I was inundated with people. Within 4 days, I had 300 musicians playing all sorts of different instruments signing up to my Google
Wonderful.
spreadsheet,
So
which was
nice.
amazing. String players, brass, woodwind, orchestral, ethnic musicians, pop, rock, and not only musicians, but mix engineers, recording
Wow.
engineers, orchestrators, assistants, music editors, you name it. And so it got out of control. So I thought, okay, I was approached by a friend of mine who works in IT, and we said, let's create a little website. And within 2 weeks, we'd created this simple website. It's called the Remote Recording Directory .net, the
Wow.
RRD.net, and it's free. And musicians sign up to it, and it's basically on spread on social media that it's the go. I have now over 750 people signed up,
Wonderful.
and not just in the UK or America, but musicians from all over the world. And it's made the world a much smaller place. And I get emails from composers saying, thank you so much for this, because I can find musicians to work with to play on my work, my projects remotely, and musicians contacting me saying, I got work out of this through the
Wow. You
pandemic,
formed a
through
company
COVID.
now.
Yeah. So it's
Wonderful.
and it's been useful for me and so many other people. So there's a composers organization in the UK called the Ivors Academy, and now the website is hosted on their website. And so
Wonderful. Wonderful.
it's not just for the Ivors Academy members, but for all composers and musicians around the world.
Wonderful.
So that's
Great.
that's something that I felt I wanted to give back to the community, and it's been helping. I hear wonderful stories from people. So, in fact, the one thing I would say is that it's made the world a much smaller place. And it was
Definitely.
always there. Remote recording has been around for the last 10 years or so because of technology. But because of the pandemic, things have become much more intense and heightened. And people have realized all you need is a good broadband internet connection, and
Yes.
you can work anywhere in the world.
Yes. Absolutely.
That's a really excellent insight into how both of you work. Whether it is finding artists from rural spaces and bringing them into your virtual studio, whether it is creating the remote recording directory.net with 750 musicians internationally. I think these are all examples of how the music industry and the people within it come together in dire times to help each other, and that's really inspiring. On that note, I did read an interview on Resolution Mag where Nainita, you had said, and I quote, "The greatest moment for me as a composer is to hear your music realized by live players." So, in these times of lockdown and social distancing, how have you been able to work with live players to realize your music with live players?
Well, actually, I had my first proper recording session at Abbey Road in after a year, about 3 weeks ago, and it was just the most wonderful experience. Just to have, I had 30 string players in Abbey Road Studio One, and what's interesting, Abbey Road, Air, all the big studios, they've all adapted very, very well. With everything is COVID friendly, social distancing. There are lots of rules and protocol in place. They only have a certain limited number of people in the booth, in the control room, and it worked very successfully. And I could tell the energy. It was the big. Apparently, it was the biggest recording session that they've had since lockdown, and you could sense the excitement in the room. Everyone was so happy to be there again, almost like normal. So that went very well. And the studios have opened up, and as long as everyone is socially distant, it's not a problem, and we're working, very very strictly, and we can function again. But with the American Murder, that was a very interesting process, because normally I would have had, at that time, I would have a whole ensemble together performing together. But Netflix were very, very supportive. Instead of spending one day recording, I had to spread out the recording sessions over 1 week. And so they gave me an extra week to record. And what I had was, I recorded strings, and I did the cellos first on a Monday, and then I did their recordings. I was in my studio here. My recording engineer was in his home, and the musicians were in their homes. The problem is that the acoustics are very different. You can't control the recording environment of each individual musician. So there's no, and it made us realize that there's no point in trying to emulate and copy the acoustics and the sound of what we would have achieved if we were in a recording studio together. So the results were different, but I wouldn't say it was bad. It was just a different acoustic sound that we created. So and also you don't have musicians feeding off one another, that energy and that collaborative energy that happens. So we did the cello parts first on a Monday, then their rough mixdown would be sent to the viola players on the Tuesday and Wednesday. And so they would listen to the cello while they were performing their parts on top of the cellos, and we layered it like a cake. So then the cellos and the viola parts would then be mixed down roughly and then sent to the violin players on Thursday and Friday. And so the violinists would be listening to the mixdown of the previous day's recordings, and they would record their parts on top. And then once we had all the elements together, we had to spend a longer time mixing. There was more time having to be spent editing and mixing. So that was one of it worked out very well in the end, but it was not without its problems. I mean, in terms of technology, the technology was great, but I was listening via Source Connect. So I had Source Connect on my Mac, and I could listen to the feed coming from the engineer and the musicians. And but because the musicians they had Zoom, and we've been using Zoom a lot to communicate and having meetings and so on. But because their iPad or their iPhone was being used for the internet to have Zoom with the recording engineer, the only way that I could communicate was to WhatsApp or text message the recording engineer, and then he would pass the information to the musician. And so we would record a take, and I would text my feedback, and he would then say it to the musician, so I could hear the feedback coming straight from me via texting or WhatsApp to the musicians, and then I would hear these voices coming out at me in my computer. But it was, it took 10 minutes to get used to it, and it was fine. It was okay. It was just this weird circle of communication going round, but it worked out really well. So yeah, I was, and then of course I mixed it. Even I'm doing a project. I've just finished a project, the one that I recorded at Abbey Road, and my mix engineer is he came here to mix actually, but I'm working on another project, and we're working out our workflow at the moment, where he's going to mix remotely. So I have all my sessions from my DAW. With all the stems, I will be using Dropbox and servers and Aspra Connect and all these Signient and Fifth Kind and all of that. Sending all these big files over to him, and then he will mix remotely in surround. I have 5.1 surround in my studio. He has 5.1 surround, and we use Audio Movers plugin, which is really, really easy. Very low latency, I think 0.1 of a millisecond or something, and Source Connect. And so I can hear the live mixes because it would waste so much time for him to mix it, send me a rough mix, me to then comment on it. I don't like it. I need to change this. I need to change that. And it would take longer to do. But by using Source Connect, I can actually listen to it and give instant feedback, and he can make little changes, and it's done there and then. So that's really exciting. And it means that I don't have to waste time in my studio mixing here, because I can carry on composing and writing music, and he can be mixing in his studio, and we can just tune in on the internet together.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Nainita. In fact, I guess from this last conversation, I've realized that the early stages of remote recording is what we would call in India jugad recording, with you texting on WhatsApp and Zoom simultaneously. But I think we've moved from there and actually found effective workflows to make this happen. On that note, the other thing is, for young producers, it is indeed a milestone to be able to track at a facility like the Abbey Road Studios. And likewise, both of you have worked at Abbey Road Studios and tracked large ensembles and tracking large ensembles are a major part of both your productions. Santhosh, this question is for you. How have you been able to take your music out of your studio to collaborate with the other artists across borders, internationally, even statewide?
So, is this pre-COVID or post-COVID? The question.
The during, let's call it
During
during
during the
COVID.
COVID, yeah, I think during the COVID we didn't have any big ensemble recordings outside of India. In India, we, as I said, the rural parts of India was there was movement within these districts, but not between districts. So there were a few studios that were still operational. They could let like a 5 to 6 member band inside the studio, and the problem was these studios were not equipped that well. So it was just recordings that were happening locally, and there was great music happening, but the capture was not on par with what we would expect internationally. So what I had to do was I had to take over the studios remotely, and it was a different kind of requirement. I had to first equip the studio, get remote access into a studio, then bring the musicians into the studio, and then we gave each musician we created a Facebook account for them, because I felt that the video quality of Facebook was much better than all of these platforms like Zoom and whatever. And there was an option to select your camera in Facebook, and so we and the one more thing was I could buy whatever plugins I wanted to buy. I could get audio movers, I could get Source Connect and all that. But the problem was when I had to control another studio, I had to rely on all the free stuff also, because we just couldn't send a dongle to another studio. There were studios which didn't even know what a dongle was, so for them it was just the software that came with the computer. So we had to find other ways to reverse engineer, like something like a Source Connect now, something that used Google Chromecast as its engine, and we had to take control of the studio, use all the regular stuff, but make sure that the signal that comes out of the studio is great. And we use like Source Connect now and remote desktop, and we used to call each musician or their messengers in Facebook. Luckily, most of the musicians had smartphones, so we used one or two smartphones and kept each smartphone in a booth, got their video in, because these musicians, most of the folk artists in India, they rely on how the listener feels. If they think that you're not happy about it, this you will hear a totally different performance. So I was here with my own camera, and the lucky thing was that in the end, some of the recordings sounded the best, because the analog to digital conversion was happening at their end, and the signal was streamed, as you know, digitally through this web server or whatever. It was streamed into my machine, and I had great gear with me, so I could tweak as we could record, and my requirements were based on on the recording that I just did. So I was actually controlling another studio, so it was a very unique process for me to record large ensembles. Otherwise, it was almost the same that Nainita would have gone through the same setup using their phones or whatever they had, their laptop speakers or whatever they could get their hands on. But in the city, I think a lot of musicians were equipped with some basic gear, and they had a good, at least a professional, semi-professional sound device, or they'll have just this one mic that they could record their voice or instrument on. So it was, I would say that it was a blessing in disguise, to try and experiment with the remote stuff. So it was so nice. At one point, I've asked some of my musicians to stay home and record from there, because they performed much. My bass guitarist, for example, Naveen, he's one of the best in the country, and I prefer to record him from his home, because he is on a different level when he's playing in front of his kid that was just born like a few months ago. And that was all the good sides and good things about this thing. So it was a great experience, and just still we are still doing it and still open to new challenges. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for that insight into your workflow. In fact, what I took out of that is, even when you are collaborating with somebody, some other musician, and you are both in the same physical space, there is a chemistry between everybody in the room. But when these people are now across different places, and you're communicating through smartphones, the importance of creating an environment of comfort for these collaborators is very important in this remote working process. On that note, with the advent of cloud technology and high speed internet, even in rural India, we have access to a much broader talent pool across the world. With services like with directories like the remote recording directory.net, and even other services that are now making its way into the musician's workflow. Um, Nainita, how do you feel about? Do you feel like this technology has its limitations? That perhaps you are now working with more people than you used to work with before, or is that not the case?
I mean, in terms of outside of musicians, my clients are based all over the world. You know, the world, I've noticed that in Hollywood, for example, they are much more open minded to employing composers from anywhere now because we're using Zoom to communicate. They don't mind, you know. The only person that suffers is me because of the time difference. I have to be, I'm doing LA to
Right in the center.
I'm awake at 2 o'clock in the morning answering emails and meetings. But with musicians, the world is a much smaller place, and I'm really excited. I don't mind collaborating with musicians from all over the world. The what I find challenging is that you're not in the same room as the musicians. And for me, it's all about, something that I learned from Peter Gabriel about capturing the magic of live performance. You're not there, you're not in the room, and things take longer. You know, that communication, you have that communication barrier. I always love having musicians in my studio here so that we have that flow of creative energy, and I can instantly say, oh, why don't you just maybe bring it down here, a little bit more expressive here? You know, that kind of emotional feedback is so important to me. And it's so much faster when you can just look into each other's eyes and you know what you want, and I'm responding to their energy, they're responding to my energy. And I always like to have a happy sort of warm energy in the studio because musicians respond to that, you know, where it's a human, it's an emotional expressive art form, so we need that. So to be honest, I mean, Zoom is fine, but I have got recording sessions that I'm not sure how I will be doing them in person. I refuse to do things
Yeah.
remotely unless they're in another country, you know, and unless the musical part is very specific. If it's improvisational and collaborative, then I have to admit I'm not going to stop working with people. In person. I think that's really, really important. You can't beat that.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Nainita. In fact, I think it will be difficult to expect any music producer to like completely cut off from being or from meeting other musicians. On that note, Santosh, based on your last three albums that just released this year, I'm saying like January, February, March, you've been working with a new music ensemble for each album. The obvious advantage is the remote recording techniques that gave you access to this broader pool. But this is a question that I've already asked before, and I'm asking you the question this time. Do you find that there are any limitations to how much technology can inspire collaborations? Do you feel like you want to keep using this technology and find more people, and does that make you feel like very comfortable with not actually meeting these people in person?
See, like Nainita said, it's nothing like having them in the same room or just in front of you. But I think the barrier is closing fast, and with when the performing musicians also can understand a bit of the technology, and when we can have a matched video and audio relay, like like what is happening right now as we speak, we have a good relay of audio and video in sync, which is yet to happen in this remote world. So I think audio wise we are set. We have we see, because the requirement for audio is much lesser than even a low quality video footage to be streamed. So audio is fine. We can record at 96 kilohertz 24-bit without a glitch in any rural part of India, and I can send my stream. Like last time when I was recording in that field, I had sent my
Yeah.
entire signal to the studio where my mix engineer was sitting and making decisions. He could hear everything that I'm sending. He is in a completely different state and whatever. So that was possible. But when it comes to video, I think we are lacking in a big way, because sending video streams across around is a very big step. And sometimes what I do is I just send the video stream through WhatsApp. So WhatsApp is doing a great job, but I think there should be a digital provider like Source Connect or whatever. Source Connect's video, I think it doesn't work really well. I got all their licenses. It was just a waste of time for me. And we need to send very good quality video, and it should be perfectly in sync for the artist or the performing musician or whoever. So in that way we can have this bridge of this gap where we cannot do it over remote, where we cannot feel what the artist feels at the exact same moment. That can be bridged closer, but it is never going to be the same. The fastest you can go is at the speed of light. That's definitely going to be a small delay, but at least we need to bridge or close the gap as much as possible with respect to video. Audio is fine. We can do anything with audio. That's what I feel from my personal experience.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing recording sessions in Eastern Europe, and we'll have video and obviously live or audio stream coming with Source Connect and all of that. That's fine with Eastern European recording orchestras. I think the challenge also video is a big one, and I think people are working on this. They've
Yeah,
finally over the
it
last
definitely is.
this is a big thing, and I
Yeah.
think it's down to the internet servers and so on. And but people are working on it, and we will have a solution within a year or 2 years. I think. I think the other thing is having live collaboration of more than one musician, having people in different locations coming together. And I tried out,
Impossible now.
yeah, I tried out a few. I tried out Jam Kazam, and it was just it just didn't work. But I'm hoping that someone will come up with
It is first come first serve basis.
yeah,
Whoever plays first.
Jam Kazam's pretty awful, which is a real shame. But
I found out another like how OfRo called it a jugad way to probably sync audio and video to the best possible way. And I think when you are on WhatsApp call, or if FaceTime is available, if the other party has Apple or whatever, so I put my video on WhatsApp, send it to my client,
mhm,
and I send a test tone, record it back, calculate the delay,
yeah,
and I delay my source connect signal by the same
ah,
millisecond, and
okay.
it's perfect. It just
Oh,
works
wow.
like how we are
Oh,
speaking now.
that's
It's perfect.
interesting. Yeah, that's a
That's how
good. Yeah,
I have a camera in front of my monitor. They think it's a video feed. They think it's ultra professional setup, but it's actually through WhatsApp. It works.
That's very
Wow,
Yeah,
that's actually a really cool hack
yeah.
yeah.
to beat a
Yeah.
system that's still actually getting
Otherwise, you just
advanced
lose
every day. And
frames. You see half of the movie. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. Um, thank you for sharing that with us, sir. And that basically brings us to the close of another episode of the Madras Medai podcast. I would like to thank both of you heaps for joining us on this conversation and giving us some of the inside scoop on your production. I personally feel inspired and challenged by this conversation, as I'm sure our listeners are as well. Before I let you go, would you like to make any closing remarks and, if possible, provide any resources to aid our listeners in their journey as creators? Nainita, would you like to go first?
Well, check out the rrd.net, okay, um, and the remote recording directory. And of course, you can find out about Source Connect, Audio Movers. Team Viewer is another good one for controlling. My engineer was controlling the musicians' computers using Team Viewer, so that's great. And I think to be honest, I'm very positive about the future. I think that everything that's happened in the last year with musical collaborations and so on is going to stay here for a very long time. And we're only going to expand on it and develop the technology further to fine tune and improve upon what has already been achieved.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Nainita. I believe even we are quite hopeful for the future and positive, because every day, when the pandemic hit us first and when we all went into lockdown, all of us equally had this sort of collective trauma, where we thought this is how it's going to be forever, and we probably all the work we put in three for the last several years is gone to waste. But quickly, we've been proved wrong, where we find several ways, starting with some jugad ways, and then to streamline into much more effective ways to make these remote collaborations possible. Santosh sir, anything you would like to tell our listeners? Maybe give us a little something from your studio.
Yes. I just want to say one thing. Music is one has been one of those art forms and industries which has sustained or even peaked during the COVID time. So I think as musicians we have a big responsibility of taking care of our fellow people and try to help everyone as much as we can, especially artists who sometimes in India I find that most of these performing artists they feel bad to ask for help, either financially or otherwise. So they just don't turn up to ask for help. I have seen so many lives lost just because they felt bad to ask someone. So I think that as a flourishing industry in these tough times, I think musicians, at least flourishing musicians, should come forward and probably create a lot of work, create a lot of remote recordings, make new opportunities. Because I am my best example, because during COVID I think I had a million more listeners on Spotify just during this COVID time. So I think that I have a responsibility, and all of us, and Nainita is doing a great job already. She's an inspiration. So we should continue doing this, and I would probably send you a clip of one of my first on-field remote recordings. Probably you can play that. I think that is the first 30 seconds of this song "Enjoy Enjoy Me" that has been released very recently, and I'll send you a very exclusive clip of just the tapes rumbling into the song. So probably that'll be a great file to probably.
That is excellent. So that actually makes us all very excited, because "Enjoy Enjoy Me" is a song that's been running on repeat in every household in Tamil Nadu. On that note, I'm a strong believer in the fact that to be human is to be of service, and musicians have to be of service to other musicians and the world itself. So that brings us to the end of another episode. Thank you very much to Nainita Desai and Santhosh Narayanan for sharing these valuable tips with us and joining us in the indie music revolution. Have a wonderful evening and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nainita.
Thank you, Santhosh.